episode 173, IRONMAN World Championship with Shane V.
Welcome to the Pursuit of the Perfect Race. I'm Coach Terry Wilson, and with each episode, I bring stories of athletes to you that share their experiences at races in order for you to learn how to have your perfect race. We will hear stories from athletes of all ages, abilities, and races of all distances. So regardless of where you fit in, there's something in it for you. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let the pursuit begin.
Today I had the pleasure of talking with Shane V about his recent race at IRONMAN World Championships in Kona, Hawaii. This race took place on October 13th, 2018, with the take-home race day being 72 to 82 and the water being in the 80s. And Shane had a time of 12 hours, 10 minutes, and 10 seconds. Welcome back to the show, Shane. I look forward to hearing about your day at Kona.
And thanks for having me.
Hey, so what was it like getting to Kona, man? I know you did the foundation, right?
Yeah, so I raced in Arizona last year, 2017, for Ironman Arizona, and I signed up late for that race because we had a newborn at home, and the only way to get in then was through a charity slot with Ironman Foundation, and ended up fundraising a bunch of money for them and earned a slot for Kona through that.
Wow. So whenever you actually think about your training going into Kona this year, what was it like being that you just did 70.3 earlier, and then now you're doing a full at Kona? So what was this like?
So I raced Texas 70.3 and the full in Texas and Boulder earlier in the year. And then didn't race a whole lot through the summer, but I raced Boulder 70.3 and had a pretty good race out there at the beginning of August. So, overall, I felt pretty well prepared coming into this. The only thing that threw me for a bit of a loop was that we had really warm weather here in Nebraska until about the middle of September, and then it just shut off, and it went from being 90 degrees every day to being like in the 50s and real rainy, cloudy here. So the last kind of 3 weeks or so that I was training in Nebraska, I felt like I was losing a lot of the heat acclimation that I had built up from the summer.
Wow. So, knowing that this is going to be a hot, hard race, how did you prepare as far as your training goes? Did you want to hit certain distances outside or certain times outside? What was this like?
Yeah, I tried to do a little bit more training outside than I normally would, especially for running, because that's where I feel like it affects me the most is on the run. So any chance I could get to run outside especially when we had the hotter days, I would try to take advantage of that.
Okay. So what was your longest swim, bike, and runs going into Kona?
My longest swim, probably about 3,000 yards, as long as I'll typically do in a workout. My longest bike was back, I think it was 1 or 2 weeks after Boulder 70.3. I did one of the gravel grinders that we have here in Nebraska, and that was 155 miles on gravel.
Wow.
So that was pretty long.
That's a tough race.
Yeah. So I felt like my bike fitness is continued to improve this year, and definitely my strongest of the three sports. And then run, I think I had a couple of 15-mile runs. I would like to get some longer run training in going forward, but I feel like that really takes a lot out of me. Like when I do long runs, I have to time them really well, like in my overall training schedule, so it's because it seems like they can take a few days to recover from before I can hit another hard workout.
Yeah. So what kind of plan are you using?
Just my own, really. A lot of it depends on like how my body feels, how I'm recovering, and then it's mostly dependent on my schedule. My work schedule, family schedule is really what dictates what I'm doing for training. But I try to time it or coincide it as much as possible with races upcoming.
Okay. Now, I kind of talk a little bit more about your day-to-day nutrition. I know that you work for certified Piedmontese, and you've mentioned them before. Are you still using them for your day-to-day nutrition?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's my primary protein source would be the beef from Certified Piedmontese. I really like it as opposed to kind of taking a protein shake to get supplemental protein. So try to include that in our meals, at least 4 or 5 days a week. Get a good quality protein source that also is, fills me up, is satiating. So.
Okay. So going into this time, I say this time, but it's really this year. Oh my gosh. Okay. When did you actually find out that you got your slot to go to Kona?
By the end of last year, I knew. Okay. Because their fundraising period lasts through December 31st. But I pretty much knew a few weeks before that I had raised enough that I would I'd be able to take one of their slots.
Wow. So if you raise a certain amount, you automatically get a slot, or what is that process like?
I don't know exactly how it all works. I know that I'd ended up raising $40,000, and I'm pretty sure though that once you've hit a certain threshold, because they have the Ironman Foundation, they had 40 people racing for the Ironman Foundation at Kona this year. And there's kind of a number of different ways that people got in through them. And I'm not sure exactly what all of those entailed, but the route that I took was fundraising through one of their race entry slots, which was from Arizona last year.
Okay. So you knew last year you were going to get to go to Kona this year. When did you book your travel?
I booked it pretty soon, or soon after that, actually, because I had some airline credit that I needed to use, and I kind of knew that there's a relay race here in Nebraska that was the Saturday prior to Kona this year, and that's something that we do every year, and I didn't want to miss that, so we did that the Saturday before, and then I flew out to Kona on Monday of race week.
Wow. So you got there on Monday. How long did you stay?
Monday to Monday. I flew out Monday. Got back to Nebraska on Tuesday.
Okay. So how much did you spend on your airfare?
Like I said, it was from a credit, so I don't even remember what that was exactly. But it's usually you're looking at $800 to $1,000 round trip to get there. It's a little bit pricier place to fly to.
Wow. Well, as far as your hotel or Airbnb, what did all this look like?
So my parents actually live there or spend about half their year north of Kona, about 15 miles. So that was really nice and convenient. I had a place to stay with them.
Nice. So whenever you got to Kona, you already had places to sleep. You didn't have to worry about a rental car or anything like that. That's pretty nice.
Yeah, it was really convenient. As far as races that I go to, it's longer to travel to, but once I was there, it was almost like being at home because, I was, I had a vehicle that's real familiar with the area, all of that. So
wow.
It was good.
Was this your first time going to Kona?
So I've been there, several times over the years and, been able to train on the course and in that area a lot, very familiar with it from that end, but this is the first time that I've ever done a race there. Whether that's the full Ironman or, they have some of the other races there and it's never worked with my schedule to actually be able to race any of those. So this was my first time, ever racing in Kona. So.
Okay. How did you get your bike there?
So because, my parents spend so much time there. I have a bike, that I leave there. But I don't get to ride it, quite as much. So I brought my bike from Nebraska, the Diamond, and that's the one that I've been racing on for the last couple of years. And it breaks down pretty small, and packs up really nice. So I took that, with me, and that was the bike that I rode for the race.
Okay. So you just pack it on the plane, I guess?
Yep. Yeah. It packs up really nice in the case, and the Diamond, the top tube comes off. So it packs up really small. and then I have a separate wheel bag. And with that, I've never had any excess or bike fee for baggage fees.
That's awesome. So you don't even have to pay for the extra.
Nope.
Wow. So whenever you actually think of your preparation to go to Kona, did you want to have a special kit made or anything like that?
Yeah, so BSR, or Big Sexy Racing through Own Way Apparel, they made custom kits for the Hawaii race this year. So we got one of those, which was basically the same kit, but new design. It's the one that I've been racing in all season. So I knew I didn't get into like right before the race, but I knew how it would fit, and that I've raced in it all year, and it's worked pretty good for me.
Nice. All right. So whenever you actually got to Kona the week of the race, what were some of the things that you wanted to make sure that you did before the race?
I wanted to make sure I got a good solid bike out on the course. So I did that like the first day that I was in. I went out and rode for 50 miles at a pretty easy pace. And then the other thing was just getting in some runs in the heat just to get a feel for it, but trying not to like overexert myself or anything. And then I did continue to swim every day leading up to the race, because it's not too taxing on the body. And that's been something that I've been working on quite a bit for the last 3 or 4 months, is improving my swim times.
Did you make sure that you got in the ocean beforehand as well?
I did, but I wasn't able to until Friday, which was okay though, because, really it's beautiful water to swim in, really good visibility. I don't mind swimming in salt water. Never had any problem with that. One of my, favorite activities outside of triathlon is actually scuba diving. So like I've dove in those waters quite a bit, very comfortable in it, very comfortable in like ocean swim. So that wasn't really any concern of mine.
Okay. Because some people don't like the swim in the water, the salt water. So,
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that swimming in that water though, just because I'm used to swimming in a lot of like Midwest and dirty lakes, where we have maybe 12, 18 inches of visibility, where there it's a lot longer than that.
Right. I mean, I think one person you can really see the bottom.
Oh yeah, I'd say for that course, pretty much the whole course, you could see the bottom. In that water, like in Kailua Bay, it gets a little bit cloudier, but it's not uncommon to see upwards of 100 feet of visibility in that ocean around that area.
That must be nice, because here in Texas, we don't really get that much of a visibility at all. You can see your elbow.
Yeah.
As far as you can see.
Oh yeah.
Man. So whenever you got there, did you make sure that you went to a certain restaurant to eat, or were you eating at home? What was this like?
So we ate at home a couple nights. We had the whole Big Sexy team over for dinner on Wednesday night, which was a good time. And then my parents' house is actually within the development of the Four Seasons Hotel there. So there's like 3 or 4 restaurants that are just right on site there and easy to access.
Wow. So were you actually at the expo whenever Bailey and Lisa did the whole presentation of that, present to Chris and Erica?
No, I was not there that evening, but I did see it on the Facebook live when they showed that, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah. It was good to be a part of that. It was pretty fun to help Ben and Lisa and all of them put that together. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So, as far as the check-in process for Kona compared to other races, this is a much bigger stage to do this. What was this like?
It's a little bit different, and I wouldn't say that it's necessarily more organized. I mean, part of it being down on the pier, and being such a big race and so many people in town, they are like a little bit restricted on, the flow of people and the flow of things through that event space. But overall, I mean, it went well. And it was just like things were just done a little bit differently or in a little bit different order, like through the check-in process. But it went pretty smooth. And I would say like of all the races I've done, there was by far like way more volunteers at this race than any other race.
Wow. So the check-in process, you get your bag and all that. What did you actually get in the bag that you got?
Yeah, I mean, there was just like a whole bunch of brochures and stuff, but the bag was pretty cool. Like it's one that, as some of the last couple of years, like with Ironman events, the bag hasn't been quite as useful for me, but this one was kind of a good sized duffel bag. So that was cool. And, yeah, just kind of basic race swag, nothing too crazy, but yeah.
So the day before is the check-in for the bike, and this is a bigger event here because people all the bike vendors are set up on the bike check-in line and getting things out. Was Diamond there to give you anything, or did they check over your bike or anything?
Yeah, so they did do a tune-up for me right before the race, and then I went down there at 2:00, and like almost everybody from Diamond checked in together. Which was pretty cool. And then I didn't realize how big of a deal like the bike check-in process was. I mean, it almost felt like finishing a race, because you're like walking down the red Ironman carpet, and there was like an announcer and everything. So that was pretty crazy and pretty unique.
Right, and they apparently have a volunteer to walk you through everything, right?
Yeah, so that was kind of like one of the things that was different with the check-in, the first initial check-in process and the bike check-in, was that you were pretty much had one person like assigned to you to take you through like almost the whole thing. So yeah, that was right after I walked my bike in. Then there was somebody that helped me like to the racking spot, and then to hang my transition bags as well.
So the day before the race, what are you trying to get in for nutrition? Being that it's going to be so hot, are you wanting to increase your salt intake or anything like that?
Yeah, it's just kind of keeping up on carbs as I had been for most of the week. And then, especially attention to getting in some extra salt on the day before.
Okay. What time are you trying to get in bed?
I think night before the race, I was in bed by like 8:00. And normally on races, like I'm lucky if I can get in bed or get to sleep by 11. But it's really nice in Hawaii this time of the year, before daylight savings. It's a 5-hour time change for me coming from Nebraska, and that made it pretty convenient to go to sleep early and get up early.
Okay. So on race day, how far of a drive is it to go to transition? Well, it sounds like you were saying actually pretty close to transition, though.
Yeah, it's about 15 miles north of Kona. And at that time of the day, it only takes about 20 minutes to get in there.
Does that have to worry about parking?
Yeah, a little bit, because I wasn't really sure what it was going to look like on race morning being there so early. But during the week, especially as it got closer to the race, it was more and more difficult every day that I went down there to get parking. Like a lot of the businesses would close off their parking lots. And when I went in there that morning, I wasn't sure like which businesses would just leave their parking lots open, because that town pretty much shuts down for the day. And there's some businesses, like I parked in a KTA parking lot, because like I don't even think they opened that day. So parking wasn't really an issue though the morning of the race.
Okay. So when you get to transition, you're putting 100 psi in your wheels and all that. But what is the atmosphere and the environment and the nerves like in the air there?
I mean, you can just tell like it's a special race. It's definitely a special place to be racing, and I checked in for body marking. I was right behind Tim O'Donnell and Miranda Carfrey. So that was pretty cool. And you can just tell like there's a lot more excitement in the air, and I wouldn't say like quite as much nervous tension as other races. Like I think, people know like the big, achievement for the majority of the people racing there is just the fact that they've qualified and are racing there. And, it's such a competitive field that, there's just like the very peak of that field that is like truly being competitive at this race. And like most of them are just happy to be there. And, I've heard a lot of people say, they treat it more as a vacation than being so focused on the race. So, it was actually a little bit like less, nervous and tense of atmosphere as some of the other races I've done, I would say.
Okay. Because, I know if I got to go to Kona, I would really be just grateful that I got there and not really worried about my time that I post up that day. But as long as I finish.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of the way I felt too. So, and I know like it's a tough course, so like if anything, when I race, like I'm usually just racing for a PR, and I know like that's probably not going to happen on that course, but yeah, just thankful for a good race and a finish.
Right. So did you have an execution time of what you want to do in the swim, the bike, the run, or did you just want to go out there, have fun, whatever happens? What was this like?
It was a little bit of whatever happens. My swim, I was like really unsure of or as far as like, what amount of time it would take me, because like I've done a few, swims without wetsuits, but like in freshwater. So I didn't know like, and ocean swim, like I didn't know how much, the surf could potentially impact that. So I really had no idea on the swim, but I came in at like 125, which is, I think it's a PR for a full iron swim for me, actually. And then the bike, I figured around 5:30 to 5:40. I finished at 5:30. And then the run, I knew I was going to struggle with just because the heat and humidity. I really don't manage that well or do well with that. So, the run was about right at 5 or just over 5. So.
Wow. So whenever you actually think of getting in the water or riding before you get in the water, the pro men involved and the pro women, and then the age groupers that are male get in there, what was this like for you? Because this is the hollow ground that everybody wants to be at, and now the cannons are starting to go off, and you're next up to get in the water. What's going on in your head, and what's the environment like there?
Yeah, I was just excited to be there. Trying to take it all in as much as possible, just to not get too like zeroed in or focused on like the race itself. And then as far as the swim start goes, that's a pretty cool place. So you get in the ocean and you can really see a lot more of what's going on around you, like I said, because of the clear water. And I was probably in the water like maybe 5 minutes before the gun went off. And I tried to stay towards the back, being a slower swimmer, but there was still plenty of people, I think, who were trying to do the same as me. So there was actually quite a few people who were just like way back from where the mass crowd was at the start. But being where I was, it did clear out pretty fast after the gun went off.
Wow. So the cannon goes off. How did your swim go?
It went really well. Because of the clarity in the water, I was able to get on some feet and draft in the swim, which, that can be pretty tough to do. And, when the water's not so clear, there was, I was going really fast on the way out. So, I knew there had to have been a little bit of a current going on, which was the case. And then once I, turned around, it was quite a bit slower coming back.
Wow. Did you have any issues with jellyfish or anything like that?
No, I did not have any problems with those.
Okay. Did you use a speed suit or did you just use your kit?
Yeah, I used a Zone 3 speed suit.
Nice. Did you like it?
Yeah, it worked really well for me. I guess this was the first race that I've actually swam in it. It's, I think it helped something because, like I said, I think it was a PR swim for me. So
great. So whenever you get done with the swim, it's an out and back swim, and you know that whenever you get to come back, the women are already gone, and you have to actually take a right and go all the way up to the stairs to get out. What was this like for you?
So actually, like in the last, probably the last 500 yards or so, like a big pack of the women were starting to catch up with me, which was okay though, because actually then I got some really fast feet to grab onto for the last bit of the swim, and then it's pretty smooth like coming out of the swim there actually, because it's all sand bottom, and then it's just straight up the stairs, so it's really a pretty clean exit, like, and then the stairs are all carpeted, so it's not like some of them that you come up on like a boat ramp or something and you got to worry about what you may be stepping on.
Okay, so whenever you get up the stairs, walk me through T1 for you.
So T1, it went pretty smooth. I mean, the pier is really long and narrow. And I was 2048 was my number, so I was closer to the end of the pier. And I guess the only things about transition was like I'm used to like people with sunscreen typically being like once you run out of the transition tent, and that wasn't the case at this race. Like the sunscreen was in the transition tent and I missed it. So I missed sunscreen before getting on the bike and ended up with a bit of a burn. And then out into the transition area and grabbed my bike. Being a slower swimmer, like especially at this venue, it was like one of the only bikes left in the area of transition that I was in. So that wasn't a bad thing. It was easy to find and easy to get out. And I mean, my transition times were about average for what I normally have.
Wow. So why did they put the sunscreen in the transition tent?
Well, I think it was because, again, the space considerations, like things get really cramped on that pier and there just wouldn't be any place for them to do it because like you grab your bike, you run through and then you're out like to the mount line and it's just a tight corridor through that whole thing. And once you come out of the transition tent, like that's where I typically see them is like before you get into the bike area,
right?
Like outside the transition tent. But here it's out of the transition tent and you're straight into the bikes. So there wasn't really any room there. And there wasn't anybody applying it, like to the athletes, so it was like they just had jars of it in there in the transition tent, which I didn't realize until I got back to T2.
Wow. So for the bike ride, what kind of strategy were you wanting to hit on the bike ride?
Just riding primarily off of power. So, targeting like 160 to 170 watts. And I think like most trying to take it a bit easier than that or on the lower end of that spectrum on the way out to Javi. And all in all, like, I executed that pretty well.
Okay. So going into this race, what was your FTP that you went off of?
I'm about 265, 270 is what I figured for my FTP. So, that's what I ride on. Like, I know I could handle more than that. Like I could probably handle 180, 190, I think on Ironman distance, but, I'm just always still feel like I'm trying to figure out the run and trying to save something for the run. And especially in Hawaii, like I knew that the run was going to be, a struggle for me. So.
Okay. So whenever you actually think of that you're going to look at, are you going to look at normalized power or 3-second average, 2-second average? What do you want to look at?
So what I'm like watching on the top of my screen when I'm riding is 3-second average. And then, I'll also have like lower down on the screen, I'll have my average for the ride and my average for my lap. Just so that I can kind of see how I'm progressing through the race.
Okay, so you're seeing what you're doing right now versus what the overall average is and then what this lap average is. So that way you can kind of guide the power that you want to push on the average and nail the average.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Now, whenever you actually think of the first few miles of the bike ride, what is the atmosphere like, and what are you seeing on the bike ride?
So the first part of the bike ride there is kind of within Kona, and there's a little out and back section, which is actually a bit longer than I was even expecting, but, and there's a lot, a lot more crowd support in that area, obviously, because it's right through town. And, as would be expected, I was higher on my power than the average that I was shooting for the race, but, I still I was keeping it, under 200, so, that was good. Plus there's a little bit more, or there's some elevation there at the beginning, especially when you come up Plani, that, is naturally going to create a bit of a spike because it is a pretty steep grade there.
How steep is it, if you had to put that in perspective?
I mean, it seems like it's probably a 6 or 7% grade on that. On the run you come up at 2, and I swear on the run it feels like a 30% grade because it took everything I had in me to just walk up it. So
wow. So whenever you actually make it to the Queen K, you realize that this is going to be a long road that you're on for a really long time.
Hey everybody, I just want to say thank you for listening to the podcast, and I just want to let you know that I've enjoyed having so many people on this show, and I couldn't really do it without your support. Thank you so much for tuning in, listening, and being a part of what I'm doing. If you would, take a few moments to leave me a review over on iTunes. It would help me out tremendously, and enjoy the show.
So whenever you actually make it to the Queen K, you realize that this is going to be a long road that you're on for a really long time. How was your mindset at this point?
It's okay. I liked it once I got it up to the highway because I was like, okay, this is the part of the course that I'm so familiar with. Because I've ridden that, many times, but mostly from where my parents' place is. I usually go north when I ride from there. So I'll ride so about 15 miles north of Kona, and I'll ride to Kauai High or Tavi pretty regularly, and I'll get 40 to 80 mile rides and on that whole northern section of the course. So I was kind of just excited to get up in that area because I know every little hill, and it's all familiar territory.
Wow. So whenever you actually get towards the middle section of the bike ride, say miles 30, 40, 50, and 60 before special needs, what was all this like for you? Were you seeing a lot of flat tires, mechanicals, wrecks?
No, I didn't. I don't think I saw any wrecks. There was only maybe 3 mechanicals. I mean, it's a pretty clean road, and I know they clean it too before the race. So, that's good. That there's too much of that.
Okay. Now, as far as the drafting goes, did you see any drafting going on?
No, not really. But it was also officiated really well. I don't know how many officials they had out on the bike course, but, I saw them a lot, probably at least 8 to 10 times I had an official pass me. So.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah, probably more than any other race I've seen. So it was very well officiated.
So this was not like Ironman Texas this year.
No, not at all. So everything that I saw, people were riding really clean.
That's good.
Yeah.
So whenever you got to the special needs, did you have anything in special needs?
No, I typically haven't used special needs. I pretty much take what I start the bike with, and then once I'm through with that, which will get me typically at least through half of the race, then I'll just switch to whatever's on course. For me on this race, I had 3 bottles of Infinite, but I dropped the one fell off on my down tube, within the first few miles of the race. So I had 2 bottles of Infinite, and then I had 6 goo gels, with me as well. So once I got through all that, that was about 1,200 calories. I just took about 3 bottles of the Gatorade Endurance, like through 8 stations on the second half of the race.
So you have to have a plan B for your nutrition plan.
Yeah. A little bit. I mean, I just dropped the 1 bottle, and being as how like I'm kind of only relying on those for, the first half of the race anyways, and then plan to switch to course nutrition after that. It just meant that I had to switch to course nutrition a little bit sooner than I was planning, which is kind of why, I guess I figured I was going to have to take 2 bottles of Gatorade, and I ended up taking about 3.
Okay. Now, whenever you get towards the later portion of the bike ride, miles 80, 90, and 100, how's your headspace at these points?
It was pretty good, actually, because, from that standpoint, the conditions were pretty good. I had, actually, a little bit of a headwind going out because, being slower on the swim by the time I was there going out on the bike, a miles, 20 to 50 or so, I had some headwind. And then when I was coming back, it was a bit of a tailwind, more or less offsetting to what I'd rode out in. So, that's nice from a mental standpoint, though, where you're dealing with a headwind earlier on in the race and then a tailwind on the second half. And it wasn't like a strong tailwind or anything, but it was enough that, I could tell it was noticeable. And then I did hit a little bit of cloud cover and even a brief rain shower around mile 85. So that was a very nice relief. And I was hoping it was all
on the bike ride.
Yeah, just briefly. Nothing too strong, and nothing that interfered with my bike. It felt a little good, cooled me down a bit. And at that point, I was hoping it was going to be blowing into Kona, and it was trying to, but by the time I got back into Kona, it was crystal clear skies.
Wow. So, whenever you think of the bike ride, is there anything that you would tell someone to be aware of that hasn't done this bike ride before?
Not too much, really. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the wind on the course, and I ride in Nebraska though, so I don't think the winds are that crazy, but I know this weekend it was relatively calm conditions. They can get a little gusty there in some places, especially coming back from Hawaii. And I rode on a pair of 808s. And I mean, if it was forecasted to be a bit windier, I may have looked to switch something out and ride a 50 on the front. And then the only other big thing is the portion of the course going to Hawaii, there's not that much of a climb there, but it's a little bit, deceptive in your mind because you think you're going to be hitting more of a climb. To me, the real climb is actually just coming out of Kauai High, which I suppose is at mile 75 or so. And, that is a climb, and it can get really hot down there because, that can really block a lot of the wind. So you don't get much airflow through there. It's not very long, but, it can kind of, I think it could kind of eat you up, if you push too hard on it.
Right. Because, this is not a flat course by any means. You have more than 5,800 feet of gain on the bike and 1,000 on the run. So, and you have the heat and the wind, and it's not that easy. How did you tackle the hill training that you want to do and train to mimic the hills here?
So in eastern Nebraska, we do have quite a few hills as well, and they're somewhat similar to what they have there, where there isn't too many sustained climbs on it. It's just kind of rolling hills the whole time, and there isn't really a whole lot of truly flat sections of the course, and it's pretty typical to what we have around here. When I did that gravel grinder here in Nebraska back in August, over 155 mile course, there's about 11,000 feet of elevation on it. So these gravel roads are just really up and down here. So I thought that was good, good preparation as far as the hills go. But the heat is, again, that's another thing. And, that's pretty tough to prepare to, and I got to figure out better ways to manage it.
Right, and that's also on a lot heavier bike too that you're doing these gravel grinders on.
Yeah, typically, yeah, because when you go on that far a ride, like you get the bike pretty loaded up because you got to take a lot of nutrition with you on those.
Right. So whenever you get towards T2, are you doing anything to prepare to start your running, or are you just making sure you're getting all your nutrition like last time? What is this?
Yeah, like? Just still trying to get nutrition in at that point. Like I was through all my gels, and I got in another bottle of Gatorade, and like stomach was feeling really good. So I mean, that's one thing for the whole day. Like, I mean, the heat like really got to me on the run, but like from a nutritional standpoint, and like as far as my stomach goes, like I felt very good there.
Wow. So what do you think of the transition to you're in here for just a touch over 5 minutes, or almost 6 months rather? How did this T2 go for you?
Pretty well. There was like there's a volunteer in there that had like big towels that were soaked in ice water. So I threw one of those on, which felt great. And then made sure to get some sunscreen at this point because I could tell that I was getting burnt a little bit, which I think, that probably impacted my perception of the heat on the run as well. Was that I had a bit of sunburn like on my neck and arms. So other than that, transition was pretty smooth.
Okay. Now, did you use a 2-piece kit or a 1-piece kit here?
It was 1 piece with sleeves.
Okay. Because I know I talked to Jonathan Fedek about his day at Norseman, and we mentioned the kits that he used in Kona, and he used a 2-piece kit one time, and he had the smiley face sunburn on his back that he said was like a 3rd-degree burn from the sun somehow. That was there for a while, so I wanted to see if you made the mistake of wearing a 2-piece kit or not.
Nah, the first triathlon I did, or it was the race up at Racine, I wore a 2-piece like that, and yeah, I had that sunburn right on my lower back, and that was the last time I wore a 2-piece.
Man, so whenever you actually get done with T2 and you get ready to head on the run, what is transition 2 like for you? Because at this point in the day, the middle pros are almost finished, and you're about to start your marathon. What was this like for you?
So I remember, going out on the run. They were, I think Patrick Lang was probably within like 2 miles of the finish at that point. So like I could hear him calling that and, saying that he was going to go under 8 for sure, so, that was pretty cool. And then, out onto the run course and like out onto Lee, which was really, I think, like the best part of the run course is the 7 or 8 miles or so on a Lee back through town and up to the Queen Kate, where, there's good spectator support. There's little breaks in the shade along the Lee. So, that was nice. And that felt more like a run course, that like a lot of events through the U.S. might have, with good spectator support and everything. So like that part was great. And then it was up onto the highway, which is where things get tough.
Wow. So the spectator on the side of the road, how were they supporting y'all? Was it really dense crowds there, or was it kind of mild? What was this like?
It was good. So like my parents were there, and then there were several people from Big Sexy that were there. Chris and Erica were there, Ben and Lisa, and Eric Greenfield. There were several people there. So, I mean, that was really nice to have, like, really good support in the crowd. So,
wow. So, the first 8 to 10 miles before you get to the turnaround point, how was these miles for you? Because this is where in the Energy Lab, out there in the middle of nowhere, it's very desolate, hot, windy. What was this like?
So, like, once I was into the Energy Lab and turned to come back?
Yeah.
That part was okay because it was like, it was starting to cool off a bit. Like the sun was getting close to going down. probably the worst part was like after I got up Palani and just felt like I just hiked up that, and then got onto the Queen K, and it was like around 3:30 or 4 o'clock, like the absolute heat of the day, and going north on the Queen K, and like that's it's just a long highway to run on, and it kind of screws with my mind because you like there's always a little bit of a grade to it, whether it's up or down. There's like never a flat part of that, and you can see the grade, but it's going on for like a quarter mile or half mile. And you know, like I get in that mindset sometimes when I do an Ironman. Like if I see a hill, you're like, well, I'm just gonna walk to the top of this hill. Well, if I can see the grade on that highway for like half a mile, you know, like I don't really want to walk for a half a mile, but you know, you're running uphill. It really may only be 1 or 2%, but like you can see it. So like in your mind, you know, you're running up a hill. And out there, you know, extremely exposed, like there's none at all. And then by the time I got like down to the energy lab, like the sun was getting low enough that it was starting to drop the temperature a bit. So.
Wow. So whenever you got to the turnaround point, what was that like?
So that was pretty good. Like I said, temperature was starting to fall off. I knew like it's a bit of a elevation drop into the energy lab, so I knew I'd have to come out of that, but it's not a crazy hill or anything. And then, you know, I knew I was on the home stretch, so that was encouraging.
Wow. So whenever you checked into the race here at Kona, did you get some red bands to give out to volunteers?
No, I didn't see those at this race, actually.
Really? That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have them.
Yeah, there was, like I said, there was just like, quite a few things that were just a little bit different, you know, like not significant, but like, even on race morning, because of like I should have mentioned this before, but like you have to go into the, King Kamehameha Hotel before you can go out the back side of it and around the back of the building to get into transition. But that's where they have the body marking is like on the back side of the hotel, which is just kind of a confusing layout then.
Why would you have to go through a hotel to get to transition?
I don't know that you have to go through the hotel, but like that is like the natural flow of traffic of where most people go is into the hotel lobby and then like through this like foyer and then out the back door. So just because it's, you know, it's like, it's so restricted space wise down there that I guess that's the only way they can do it.
Yeah. So from the event, like from the event outlook on it, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of room down there to do a lot of things.
No, not really. And that's why like, you know, spectating, I mean, there's big crowd down there, but like, and I was lucky because like racing through the Ironman Foundation, they gave me a couple of VIP passes that like I was able to give to my parents so that they were able to get out onto the pier during the swim, which is really cool. But like, you can't just get out onto the pier, you know, like it's not like open to the public or anything.
Chances are you weren't going to buy those.
Oh no, no, they're pricey, and yeah, they get
$2,500 a piece.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Man, like I was looking at that on the website. I was like, are they serious? Like they have one VIP pass that's like $10,000.
Yeah.
Like wow. No,
yeah.
Get out of here. This is not like a big deal. I mean,
yeah.
I'm not doing it either, but whatever. So, whenever you start thinking about the run, did you see any spectators that were dressed funny or had anything funny on a sign that stuck out?
Well, there was the Ruby's Lube guy, you know, so I got some lube from him. And there was, yeah, I don't know. There wasn't like that many like people that were just like crazy, you know. I mean, you could tell like there was a lot of excitement in the atmosphere, but it wasn't like, you know, there's some of those races that like you get some pretty crazy people out at, like Texas and Wisconsin. You know, those are the ones that come to my mind where the people like just really party hard the whole day. You know,
well, Wisconsin is a party town. So
yeah, for sure.
That.
Yeah.
So from a data perspective, are you doing a run-walk on the run, or are you looking at certain metrics as far as pace goes on the run? What is this looking like?
Yeah, I mean, like on Ironman runs, I usually don't make it through too many aid stations before I take the approach that I'm going to walk the aid stations and try to run in between. On this course with the heat, like there were some other factors. So I was walking all the aid stations, and then there was portions where like, you know, there would be a bit of a hill, or portions like when I was northbound on the Queen K where it was just so hot, like I had to slow down, and just walk for a bit to keep my temperature regulated. But typically like I'm going for, walk the aid stations and run between.
Okay. So, mentally, were you battling any demons on the run?
No, I mean, I felt like I stayed in pretty good, like, space in my head, you know, I just still knowing that, like, it was such an honor and privilege to be racing there. But outside of that, yeah, like those conditions are just absolutely brutal for me. So, so it's just a matter of like keeping my pace in check. And that's one race though too, where like I finished every race that I've started, and, maybe I could have pushed a little bit harder. Like I wanted to break 12 hours. And I don't know if I could have, but, I didn't really feel like I wanted to like test it too much, because that was my opportunity to race there, and I wanted to make sure that I finished. So,
right. You get a medal there. I mean, that's what everybody wants, is just a medal.
Yeah. Yeah.
The total on, yes, that's one thing. But then the next one is you got to get the medal.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
Wow. So the miles 18 through 24, what were these miles like for you?
So that's where I started to get a little bit better, because like the temperature definitely dropped. I think it was probably around mile 20, 22, where like it was pretty much completely dark at that point, which it gets very dark out on that highway, because there's only lights, like at the intersections. There's pretty much no lights in between. But it was good because the temperature was dropping. So.
Wow. So whenever you got to hear the finish on the first time, and you knew that you were going to make it, where were you at in relationship to the finish line? Because it's really, really loud, really bright, and you can hear it for a ways away. What was that like?
Yeah, that was great. So yeah, I knew I was getting close, and from that point, it's all downhill too, and like a pretty good downhill. So where I could start to hear it was like right at the turnoff from the Queen K to Palani. And that's where like the big downhill starts. And I think it's probably about 7/10 of a mile or so, because you go down Palani, the really steep hill, for 2 or 3 blocks, and then hang a left and kind of do another loop back down to Alihi. And as you get close, well, and actually there's another announcer that's right at the bottom of Palani. So you're not quite half a mile from the finish, and they're already like kind of calling you in and your name and stuff. And it's not Mike Riley, because it's the other guy that announces a lot of them with the Australian accent. So he calls your name first, like when you're about a half mile out, and then you do the loop down to Ali. So that mile is really fun, because it's downhill, and you're back in town, and all the crowds there. So that was great.
Wow. So what was it like actually getting onto the red carpet here? I mean, this is like the most treasured piece of real estate in the Ironman circuit, and you're on the carpet that everybody wants to be on.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like that was really exciting. I mean, best finish line I've been through by far. And really, just like the whole week leading up to the race, like it's such a special event, and you can really tell that like through the atmosphere, just the entire week. And it's so cool too, because like Kona it's a pretty small town. So like when that race is going on, especially the day of the race, like the town is literally shut down, but pretty much the whole week, like everybody that's there is there for the race. So it's pretty much just and tons of like famous people in triathlon are there. Like, it's kind of like the who's who of triathlon, and then everybody who's there is there for the race or in some form or another.
Wow. So after you get to the actual red carpet and the moment that you see the finish line, what was your impression of the finish line, knowing that this massive arch is like an electronic billboard, basically, and they have this massive flower lay on top of it? What was your impression of this?
Yeah, it's really cool. This finish, like I knew I was going to come in the dark, and the only other race where like I come in the dark and like I pretty much know I'm coming in the dark is at Arizona, because it's late in the year. And there's something about those finish lines actually when you come in and it's dark and they're lit up like that. It's absolutely blinding the amount of lights that they have shining directly into that finish area. But it's really cool. Like it's really exciting, and it's actually like it's kind of a shock to the eyes too, because like it's the same way at Arizona. Like before you come into that finish, you're in like really dark parts of the course that aren't lit like at all with street lights. So like it kind of shocks your system, like on top of all the other excitement and emotions that's going on, so like you have all this bright light shining on you. So it's pretty cool.
Wow. So what was it like emotionally for you?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was like, I'm not one to like, to cry, but I guess that would be like, the closest I would probably come to it, and yeah, I mean, like I said, it was by far the best finish I've ever been through, without a doubt. So.
Wow. So this finish line is a little bit different. You don't get your medal right then and there. You get a little bit later. Walk me through what it's like to finish here.
Yeah, so I wasn't aware of that first off, so then I was like looking around for my medal later on. I was like asking people where I could get it. When I went through the finish line though, there was one of the ladies from the Ironman Foundation actually like greeted me then and gave me a lei. And then it's kind of like all the rest of the race venue where like things are just set up a little bit differently, and it doesn't just naturally like flow you into like where you're supposed to go. So I ended up like stumbling around for a little bit, trying to figure out where I needed to go and whatnot, which is okay, because sometimes you get done with those races and just sit down, and that's maybe not the best choice.
Okay. So when you actually got your hat and all their finish line garb, what did you do next?
So then I went back. I got my morning clothes back because I put that somewhere else, like through the VIP thing where I checked it in. And, I went back though to look for my bike and my transition bags, and they were gone. Which I had given the ticket to my parents, but I told them like, the next day or after I'd already given them that ticket that like I didn't think they needed to pick up my bike. So I thought they were just going to leave it, but they'd gone ahead and picked it up. So I went in there and realized that they'd already grabbed the bike, which was a really good thing, because for whatever reason, I don't think they opened up the transition till like 7:00, which is a bit later than what they normally do. And something was taking like a really long time to get bikes out of there, because the line had to have been at least a couple hundred people to get the bikes out. So I was really happy they had gotten it for me, because it would have taken quite a while to get out of there.
Wow. So after all this fun stuff, did you actually go back to the finish line to see the midnight hour?
No, I didn't go back. I went back home, and I did watch it online though. And, it's one of those, like, I don't know, I've done that a few times, and then you see some really cool stuff, and it's like, well, I wish I would have been there, like, Marcus, Cook, I think, through the Ironman Foundation, the guy from Texas that lost like, 280 pounds or something, like he came in close to the cutoff, and then there was the 86-year-old from Japan that came through. So, yeah, lots of cool stuff. And I did see it, watching online, and yeah, that's something that I'll have to do at the next one is go back for that finish. It's always something like I know I want to do, but it's kind of tough. Like after I've gone and sat down, and then realize how hard it is to move.
Right. So, what's something that you actually learned from this race that you'd want to pass on to someone who hasn't done Kona yet?
I mean, so this was my slowest. This is my 9th full Ironman, and it was my slowest of them all. But it was, definitely the most enjoyable. I think the race went pretty well for me. Like I think I executed it well. I probably could have gone a little bit faster, but in hindsight, like I wouldn't change anything about that. Because like I felt like I wasn't like pushing myself to the point where I was like missing like the gravity of the race, and the atmosphere. So I mean that would probably be my best advice. It's like, just take this one, to take it all in, I think would be how I do it again. So.
Okay. Now for those people that haven't been to Kona before that are going next year, what are some places around town that they should definitely see before the race?
I guess it depends on before or after. So like, I haven't spent like a lot of time, in Kona itself, but, there are like a few things there, and at the top of the list, I'd say, as I mentioned earlier, I do a lot of scuba diving there, but you can go on, a manta ray snorkel. And I think that's one of the coolest things you can do there. So they can do it as like, they put scuba divers at the bottom and snorkelers at the top, and they take in lights. This is at night, and plankton are attracted to those lights, and then the manta rays come in and feed off the plankton, and that's pretty cool. It's one of the only places in the world that like they can get like that many manta rays to show up, and they show up like on a nightly basis. So that's one thing to do, and then like I'd say going up to the top of Mauna Kea.
What's Mauna Kea?
Mauna Kea is one of the 5 volcanoes that make up the island, and that's the one with there's about 13 or so telescopes at the top of it, and you can drive up to the top of it. It's just shy of 14,000 feet. So I guess it could give you a little bit of altitude acclimation too, but you can drive up there and like watch a sunset or something. And I think that's a really cool thing to do. It's kind of crazy, like when you drive up there from sea level and all of a sudden you're like, feel like your head's going to explode or something. But, it's a pretty surreal environment, because it's all the like volcanic, soil up there. There's nothing that grows up there. And then there's all these telescopes. It looks like you're on the surface of Mars or something.
Wow. Because like I went to Leadville earlier this year. No, sorry, not this year. Last year we went to Leadville, which my wife visitors for ski trips, but we went up there and right after Boulder, so we went to last year, and that was crazy. Like I could hardly breathe.
Yeah.
I mean, that's only 10,000 feet or so.
Yeah.
This is another 4,000 feet on top of that.
Yeah, and it's like, normally it's like 30 to 40 degrees up there. So big temperature shift too.
Wow. I did not realize it was that big of a difference. Wow, so moving forward, we covered a lot about Kona. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. So what's next for you, man?
Well, I'm doing a half marathon here in Lincoln, next weekend, so it'll be 2 weeks out from Kona. It's just one that I ran every year. No more tries this year. I'll maybe just look for like a couple running races locally, and then next year, Texas 70.3 and Ironman Texas. I've done that the last 3 years. Really enjoy those races. And then I'm going to do Chattanooga 70.3,
Nice.
which would be the first time racing down there. So I got like quite a few races early in the year again next year. I really like doing that. And then it keeps me motivated through the winter.
Cool. Well, I'll be at Chattanooga 70.3. I'll be volunteering at Texas again for sure. I might actually do Galveston again. I mean, I've done that
That'd be great.
a few years in a row now, so I'm not ready for it yet, but I might just swing that in there. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Chattanooga. I'm hoping for a good downriver swim.
Yeah, you get the swim portion really good, but the run, there's some hills on the run. So
Oh, yeah.
you got to be prepared for that. It's heat. There's not a lot of shade on the run course, aside from a few parts here and there, but a lot of it's exposed in the heat, and it was warm this year. It was warm.
Yeah. Cool.
Wow. So, again, this is your third time on here. I already know what your definition of perfect race is and all that fun stuff. So, to wrap up this episode, what's the hardest workout you've ever done, and what made it so hard for you?
Hardest workout. I don't know. I'd probably lean towards like some of the bike workouts I've done, and just doing like the 2x20 on the bike, or I do those sweet spot intervals, and I mean, I'd say those are probably the toughest. But outside of that, I would say that gravel grinder that I did earlier this year, I treated it as a workout because it was kind of like part of my build into Kona, and that was 155 miles on gravel. So I'd say that was probably the hardest.
Well, Shane, it's been great. I've enjoyed it. If people want to follow you, how can people follow you?
So Facebook, Instagram, I use those quite a bit, and then I log everything on Strava as well.
Nice. Well, it's been great hearing about Kona, and I wish you the best next year for 2019, and we'll get back on after some of your races next year, and we'll talk soon, okay, man?
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you were able to learn something from today's episode. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to leave a review on iTunes or share it with a friend. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to see pictures from this athlete's race, learn more about who I am, what I'm doing, or be on the show yourself to share your story, check out my website at CoachTerryWilson.com. Until next time, continue the pursuit.